You're on air with Regime Gaming. Our values are honor, valor, sacrifice, and esprit de corps with you. And today, we're going to give you an honest review of the game Godfall. Now, Godfall is a game, they say it's a looter slasher, and, you know, this is from Gearbox Publishing, who also publishes Borderlands, and you would think, okay, so, is it just Borderlands with swords? Not exactly. Because of the melee-focused combat in the game requires you to know what weapon you're using of the 5 different types that you have. And there's a lot of the game that isn't taught to you initially. For example, you have to unlock the ability to take downs on enemies. You have to unlock the ability to, you know, do certain shield techniques or certain weapon timing techniques. With the longsword, you have your 2 weapon techniques that, you know, each do something a little bit different. One dashes you up to the enemy and gives you an invincible flurry. The other one dashes you through the enemy, kind of like a quick draw EI, right? And, well, it's actually more like a whirlwind sword EI, right? And then things like your Archon Fury, as I'm displaying here, have the ability to kill certain enemies fairly quickly as well, or to buff your abilities. For example, the Valor plate that I'm using here, Bulwark, actually gives you the ability to increase the chance of bleeding your enemies while the Archon Fury is active. And this game has a total of 12 Valor plates, each of them focusing on either a different ability or a different aspect of the game. For example, you've got, you know, the Valor plate that does critical damage, the Valor plate that does bleed, poison, fire, chill, electricity damage, and you even got Valor plates that focus on certain things. Like, for example, what I did there was I soul shattered the enemy. And that soul shatter is something that allows you to, you know, build up energy in the foe, right? Just like that. And if I hit him with a heavy technique now, boom, he explodes. And certain weapons give you the chance to cause an explosion, do damage to other enemies around him, right? And see just how that weapon timing technique went? How I just kind of finished him in one blow by aiming at the weak point? Sometimes you don't always hit the weak point with those follow-up hits. So it's a game that's very deep in terms of the combat. It's something that, at first glance, you cannot hack and slash your way through the game. You cannot just stab, 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 it's dead, move on. It takes time to think. And here you can see the skill tree, right? The skill tree is something that, as you gain skill points, you unlock different skills in certain areas. Some of the skills give you the ability to throw your shield, do different things with your shield. Some of the skills give you the ability to hit weak points, or to take that weak point with the enemy, right? And it's one of those things where you have to take your time and work through the game and learn what the game is doing. For example, this here is the Sword of Courage. One of the abilities of the Sword of Courage is that if I cause the enemy to bleed, which happens a lot because I'm using Bulwark, and I have like a 40-something% chance of bleed, I shoot these massive projectiles at the enemy, which kills them, basically. And if I chain the bleeding and the projectiles, I can just kill a whole bunch of enemies by shooting these projectiles at them, if I can proc the bleed. You can see here how long it took to proc the bleed on that enemy. And these very interesting combinations and learning your fighting styles. This is a longsword. So the longsword is going to have one fighting style as opposed to your polearm, because, you know, your polearm is basically your standard dragoon type weapon. You get your little jump move, you get your little, you know, pokey stabs, and you get your little, you also get one of my favorite timing attacks is actually with the polearm, where you stab them and then you come around and hit them from behind with the spear thrust, right? And there's just not a lot of this isn't explained by the game. You have to go in and experiment. And it gives you a sense of appreciation when you actually get good with a weapon. Unfortunately, the boss fights, they don't give you much room to practice on the bosses, right? But what this game does well is it gives you a lot of, fodder enemies where you feel somewhat challenged by them because you have enemies that shoot projectiles at you. You have enemies that decide to swing heavy swords at you. You have enemies that come at you and bash you in the face with their shields. And there you have what I did was what we call a polarity attack, right? A polarity attack, you build up, like, you can actually unlock the skill tree, and with the polarity attack, you build up damage between the two weapons. So the more damage you do with one weapon builds the polarity attack for the other weapon when you do switch to that weapon. And these little things just add up in such a way that make Godfall a game that you feel like it has a lot of potential. You've got 5 different weapon classes. Your sword, your long sword, your dual blades, your pole arm, your war hammer, and your great sword. So the great sword is somewhere in between the long sword and the war hammer. The heavy sword, you'll get to see some combat with the great sword later on. And you can see that you can't just sit back and sit behind your shield and turtle everything, right? Your enemies have a secondary bar under their health, which is their stagger bar, essentially. And when I say stagger, well, they call it breach in this game, and breach is another mechanic, right? So while he's sitting there, breach, I can actually pull off a takedown on him, as you see here. And there's my standard weapon technique again. Followed by the second weapon technique with the longsword. And that's actually what we would call a spectral takedown, something that you can do after killing an enemy with a weapon technique. But you have to unlock it in the skill tree first. So when you first start out the game, you're not a very strong character because a lot of your skills haven't been unlocked. You haven't learned how to properly parry attacks. You get better at parrying attacks as time goes on. You get the parry window to open up. You get to change your Valor plates, and after you unlock new Valor plates, you get to see what these Valor plates can do. And you see, each of these weapons is also part of a deeper system, right? So you have your charms, your rings, your trinkets. You have a banner that you can put down that gives you certain effects. And you've even got a life stone. And the life stone, on top of restoring health to you, it also gives you certain effects. It's also got an augment system where, early on through the game, you don't even unlock all your augments, but you get certain things. For example, like I get health back every time I kill an enemy. And these are these little things that add together to make Godfall a game with great potential. There is the storyline of the game feels as though it is light, right? And when I say light, I mean if you wanted to grind through, you could beat this game in 8 hours, no problem. I'd probably even say 4 hours if you were that gung ho and quick at beating the game. So here you see the skill tree, right? And the skill tree opens up. It gives you the ability to siphon life from enemies, breach your enemies, critical hit damage. You can actually do a slam that weakens your enemies. And each of these things you can actually choose to invest in to either build your stats or build your abilities in this tree. And you can go ahead and refund these skills and start over from scratch if you didn't, want to put something into ability, or if you wanted to make a specified build for something, right? In short, the gameplay during the story is it's not extremely challenging until you get to the bosses. It's, they send a bunch of mobs at you, and once you learn how to counter each type of mob, the game becomes easier. The game becomes more reasonable, right? See here, we're using the shield and we're just knocking him down or beating the nonsense out of him with the shield. And see, he's petrified now. And that's also something you unlock using what can I say? The game gives you something to look forward to every time you fight. And you unlock a new ability. You're uppercutting people with shields. You're breaking people's necks. It's a great game. However, is it worth the hype? I don't know yet. I mean, you get 8 hours of solid gameplay out of them, right? But do you really get the full feeling of the game? I don't think so. Not in your first 8 hours. When you've gone through and done your optional tasks, I think that the gameplay is only part of the story, right? So the story gets you. It kind of feels like a point where it's preparing you, and that takes you up to, you fight Macros, and Macros isn't that hard to beat, like he's not. This isn't Dark Souls where you're trying 500 times. It's not Borderlands where you're gunning down the enemy from afar with your weakness. It's methodical, timed combat, and it feels good. But it also, if you're only using one Valor plate, I can see how it can get boring. This isn't a game where you're meant to use one Valor plate for the entirety of the game, right? You're supposed to switch things up. You're supposed to change the way you approach different enemies, different fights. Some things are better than others. For example, with the pole arm, you have the ability to javelin throw, right? With the dual blades, you have the ability to attack really quickly and build up a lot of soul shatter charge real quickly, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give Godfall a solid 7. And I would give it a 7 because it's a solid game. It gives you a lot that you could build off of, right? I have yet to play the multiplayer, but I can imagine that it would be amazing with, 2 other people who know how to fight. And it changes the dynamic instead of, 1,500 hordes against just you, where you've actually got a solid teammate who's blocking for you or intercepting some of the blows that would normally come for your head. I can see how this game would be tough to get accustomed to, because if you're a Call of Duty player, this game it's a slower paced game. One of the most amazing things that I learned in this game is that you can actually run from one place to another fairly easily. Once you get that run going, you actually start feeling better about yourself. See once the run kicks in, you're actually not moving around slowly in this giant suit of armor, right? It's amazing that the game gives you a lot of room for exploration, but at the same time, it feels like the game can allow you to get lost as well, which is good. I mean, sometimes you're stuck looking for an objective for ever and a half, and it doesn't really spell things out for you. Even though the spirit vision does help, sometimes it's just rough. You can't get everything you're looking for. And, overall, like I said, a solid 7 out of 10. I would recommend that anyone who likes a good game with a solid basics, you've got 5 weapons and the shield. Because the shield, I haven't said anything about the shield. You're going to be using that shield a lot more than you think. That shield is there to protect you from projectiles. That shield is there to, pound somebody in the face with. It's just, Godfall is an experience. And I believe that once the DLCs start coming out for the game, it will be a game not unlike Warframe, where it will build upon itself, give you further valor plates, give you better abilities and better weapons, newer and interesting weapons to choose. While at the same time, I don't know why they didn't include a bow in the game, probably because they didn't want you to be cheap and hide out in the corners and snipe somebody, right? Because that'd be awesome if you could snipe a boss death, right? But even though they didn't give you a bow in the game, there's a lot of things that this game does right. The visuals, they are gorgeous. You cannot stop being enthralled by, as you move through the realms. The realms are beautiful. Like, you can't stop staring at the surroundings going, oh wow, this is a new realm. And it almost feels unfortunate that you only get 3 realms in the main game. Like, it feels over too soon. And you're waiting for them to come out with more. You see, every time you switch weapons, like, look at here, you can see that the hammer feels different than the great sword, feels different to the long sword, which feels different to the dual blade. Every time you change weapons and change characters, it gives you just a different outlook on the game, and you now have to compensate for the fact that, okay, my hammer's going to take half a second to wind up before I can swing and hit somebody. So how do I deal with that guy coming at me in my face, right? And these are the tiny calculations and adjustments you have to make at almost all times to make the combat worthwhile. I think that Godfall has a promising future. I just wish that, a lot more of the combat mechanics were initially explained. And I also wish that the crafting system were explained a little bit more in depth. Because, unfortunately, a lot of the crafting that you have to do isn't as well explained as, it could be. Yeah, they tell you, okay, you use these resources to craft this. But what the game doesn't tell you is that you have a random chance of crafting certain things onto the follow-up, right? So, for example, if I get a ring that increases my chance to bleed, well, I can also craft an additional chance to bleed on that ring and further improve that chance to bleed on the ring. It makes the game, I guess you could say, longer, but at the same time, it makes the game feel very customizable. Unfortunately, the customization is random. So sometimes when you drop a weapon or drop a piece of armor or a ring or a charm, that weapon, armor, piece of ring, piece of charm, it doesn't get the stats that you want it to. So then you've got to farm a weapon to kind of get the stats on the weapon that you want. And it turns into, kind of like in Borderlands, where you have to farm a legendary weapon to make sure you have the right anointment on it. It kind of gets like that, unfortunately. But overall, Godfall is a solid 7 out of 10. I would actually say that, visuals, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. The only problem I have with the visuals in Godfall is from time to time you get this weird little hiccup in the middle of combat. And I don't know what's causing that. Storyline, the story's a little bit weak. I'd give that a 6 out of 10, right? You actually have to do a lot of reading in the lore. It's not as compelling in the storytelling as some other games. So as a solo adventure, you kind of going through killing the bosses because you've got to kill your brother, right? But there's not a lot of why. You don't feel the why. From a gameplay perspective, The game plays extremely well. You know exactly what you're doing as you're. Well, actually, I take that back. You don't know exactly what you're doing as you go, but as you start button mashing and trying to learn how to play the game, you learn that button mashing isn't the way. You learn that sometimes baiting out an opponent's attack, sometimes dodging right after, a certain amount of a combo. You learn these little techniques that allow you to survive a little bit longer. And I would actually give gameplay an 8 out of 10, right? Because unfortunately, if it was explained a little bit better, there's not a lot of hand-holding in this game. If it was explained just a little tiny bit better, I'd probably give the gameplay a 9. But it's not explained enough, and when they give you a bonus to do a certain amount of timing attacks on an enemy, and you haven't unlocked timing attacks yet, you don't know that you're supposed to unlock timing attacks to be able to do them. So you have to actually go ahead, put the skill point into the timing attacks, and then come back and do the timing attacks. And then you can get the bonus, but the bonuses often tie into what we would call extra loot. Overall, 7 out of 10 with Godfall. And you can see from the gameplay here, it feels amazing. I can't wait to see what they come out with for DLC. I can't wait to see what they come out with for follow-ups in terms of this game, because they built a universe here that they can build on. It almost feels like we're missing something. It almost feels like we're waiting for something new to come out. But I haven't done the full post-game yet. So the post-game is where you go into the Dreamstones and where you hit the Tower of Trials to unlock better weapons. So we will definitely see how this game plays out. If you are asking whether or not you should get Godfall, if you are a fan of Devil May Cry, if you are a fan of skill-based gameplay, lots of time, I would say do it.